Yeah, so I'm very excited to have you both on the podcast. Both Jordan and Dallas are Empower Ed Fellows, and of course DC educators. Do you want to get started just by introducing yourselves?
Sure, yeah. So I am Dallas Cherry. I'm currently a high school science instructor. This year I teach everything. But more specifically, I teach chemistry, I think. Chemistry, environmental science, and I do some math tutoring as well. I'm originally from New York City. I went to the great Temple University. Um, yeah. And then any other questions? How else do I introduce myself? Lover of music, lover of hiking, lover of all beaches and all of those great, amazing things. And I really love making playlists and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going hiking at some point because I also need people
Let's
to.
do that.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dallas. Miss Jordan.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Jordan Daugherty. I'm a dance educator, now going on 8 years. I teach pre-K 3 through 8th grade. And then I do all sorts of other things at my school, family engagement liaison, club leaders, sports coordinator, all those fun things. Outside of that, I really enjoy activities. So any activity on the weekend is like something I'd be up for. Like I like to bowl. I like to do so. I'll join y'all on that hike. I'm an activities type person if I'm not dancing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. Um, Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we are inviting you both on the podcast today to do sort of an introduction for a new group that Empower Ed is rolling out. It's going to be called Rest and Rise. I know you both are very interested in being on the podcast, so we are very excited to have you, especially for a special episode like this one. Rest and Rise is going to be an event series for Black educators, and this is like very near and dear to my heart. I think especially given DC's history and just there's such a rich history and legacy of Black educators in the city. We know that there is so much research specifically on how Black students benefit from having Black educators in front of them in the classroom. And so just very excited to create a space for DC educators to convene and share and connect and just like be in the fullness of themselves as Black educators. And we also know, as well as something that we might explore a little bit later in this episode, just for both Black students and Black educators, there's a lot of racism and anti-Blackness more specifically that is baked into a lot of our systems. And so it is really important both that we are the people that are doing this work, and also that we're taking the time to like rest and recollect ourselves, connect with one another. There's also a lot of research and evidence that community process is something that can really prevent burnout for educators of color, for Black educators specifically, people going through racism-related stress, which we are going to call racial battle fatigue in this space following Professor William Smith's research. But before we get started with all of that, I guess my first question for you all is why, to you, is it important to show up as a Black educator for our students? And did you also benefit from Black teachers growing up? And I'll shoot it to Ms. Jordan first. Think you're muted, Ms. Jordan.
I guess I'll start with an experience that kind of has been like a really special spot in terms of my teaching. When I started at this school 7 years ago, 7 years ago, or within my first or second year, I started a ballet club. And it ended up getting like local attention and then national attention. And a student was on the clip and she said, I really enjoy the club because of representation. I don't see people that look like me when I enter a ballet studio if my families could afford it. And I did not grow up in the arts, having a ton of Black representation, being born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, where it's there, but not necessarily always accessible. And that has always just stuck with me. And ever since that student said that, what has kept bringing in my mind is I'm a Black woman, I'm a Black educator, and I mean something to the other Black girls and boys who are in the building. Even if it's not for dance, whether it's just like, oh, here's another person that looks like me, and this is what they're doing now. Like they get to see a different lens or a different light than what they're exposed to. And I think exposure is key from now until you're 100 years old. What you like take in and watch really kind of helps develop your character. And then I didn't have that many Black educators growing up, but the ones that I did have were very substantial and influential. I had a math teacher in 6th grade who was the first one to tell my mom she needs a tutor. And my mom's like, oh, my daughter needs a tutor? And she's like, yeah, she needs a tutor. And I have the perfect person for you. And we drove to this woman's house, and just her pouring that a little bit more into me, I went to the tutor. I didn't stay with the tutor forever. I just needed that extra push. And that particular teacher was smart enough to know, like, I'm doing as much as I can with 28 other students in the room. I need to give you a little bit of help. And not everyone always does that. And I think it's like a communal thing with like Black and brown people. We all gonna help everyone out. It's a village. I'm gonna pull you up. I'm gonna pull, like, we gonna get pulled up together. So I think of like her, and then I try to think of like, what I try to be for my students as well, a community.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that was a really powerful story. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really benefit from Black educators outside of my family members until high school. So I think like it's really important. I know you start in pre-K. It's really important to like have that, be part of that village for students early on. Thank you for sharing that. Dallas?
Yeah, so and I don't really want to repeat what was already said, but it's essentially similar for me. Growing up in New York City, New York is a very diverse place. Specifically Harlem, you see so many different people of different like backgrounds. And yes, though the neighborhoods are typically like Black, there's so many people that have been able to be influential: Spanish, white, Black, Asian. And I remember literally a lot of those names still to this day in my big boy age. Um, and so I think it's those experiences that and that diversity that I've experienced that has been helpful for me to like I guess give me that well-roundedness that I needed to then now go and say I'm going to pay it forward. So similar to what Ms. Jordan just expressed is that um, I feel like we don't have young men and women who are able to see people in higher up positions to do certain things. They don't have people to see as an example of, hey, I want to do this. The only people that they have are like these artists, these music artists, these sports figures to say, hey, I want to do this. But hey, there might be somebody that is the next best scientist that is making waves in the science world that you can look up to. Or hey, there's this amazing dancer that's making and shaking the ground that maybe one day is also doing choreography for Beyonce or something like that. If you are passionate about dancing, I think they need to see so many people who one are interested in different things that can be a well-rounded individual that can bring those strengths and those talents to them in whatever space that they're in. So for instance, me, um, science, I don't know what it was. I don't know how I ended up here to this day. And I think it's all by a series of, I love the book Series of Unfortunate Events growing up, but a series of fortunate events that led me to where I am to this day. Um, Everything happened for a reason. And now I found that I have a passion in science because of college and even getting to college. A lot of that drive to want me to even pursue college and to pursue sciences in the colleges in college was the summer youth program in New York City. Though I didn't see so many people that looked like me, I saw so many older Black people that were working in a pharmacy simply as a pharmacy tech that said, hey, I want to go do some pharmacy stuff. And then I said, you know what, this pharmacy stuff ain't for me, but I still want to do something for other people that look like me to maybe pursue some science. And so I think that's been my mission through and through, is to like expose our kids to, and not even just the kids, expose adults to like the world of science, so that they can see, if you're living, you're breathing, you're walking around here, you are a scientist, you're doing things. And here are also so many of these Black amazing scientists that, one, are from your neighborhood, who are from this area, that have been making these inventions, that have done these things, and you can be like them as well. And so I think that's honestly how I got into this thing, and how I even came here to the Washington, D.C. area, was because they said, hey, we need more Black educators, we need more Black men who are educators to now support and nurture our babies.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think something that I really loved about your response is just the importance of role models, and not just like role models in a certain lane, but like if we're really serious about, as educators, showing up in the fullness of ourselves, also making sure that our students can do that, and that they have role models across different versions of themselves, really, different possibilities. So yeah, thank you for sharing that as well. um, I guess, so the next question is how identity plays a role in your teaching or your classroom culture. And I know that can be a tricky one, because sometimes classroom culture can be very narrowly defined. And so trying to like make space as Black educators so that it is culturally responsive for your students, or how you've navigated that in your classroom.
Yeah, jump
Yeah, go for it. Jump in. I think,
in.
okay,
These
sorry.
5 years at the school that I'm currently at, and it's changed and it's developed year after year. And I'm like, hey, this is my focus this year. We're gonna look at it this way. We're gonna do this thing. Sometimes I think you have to like literally explore the actual identity of your students to then shape the identity of what your classroom is going to look like. Um, and I think it's important, one, to like let students know who you are, so that you can also kind of have this shared experience. It's not about me, it's not necessarily just about them, but it's about us and how we can grow together. I think one of the joys that I've experienced in teaching is, hey, as our students are learning, I'm also learning with them. I'm also growing with them. Um, and so I think part of that growing is me learning just who they are. I'm not from here originally. I'm from New York City. And I'm just like, I can't just be a teacher in your city and not know the things that you like and the things that you enjoy, and know your neighborhood and know where you come from, and hey, know the foods that you like to eat, know the music artists that you like to listen to. Um, but then it also allows me to give them a little bit of that flavor of like that I bring. I see it as such a, I hate to use the term melting pot, but we're all adding something into this huge pot of like this stew that we're cooking up. And every year it's a different recipe that I enjoy. Like, we enjoy eating. And so, for instance, one of the things, and then this is a huge thing for me, I mentioned I love music. Um, this year was finding ways to connect to my students through music, trying to find a lot of affirmations that are in the rap music, even the songs that they listen to. Um, and then also bridging that gap of, hey, these are some songs that I like, because that's honestly what shaped me. So
Mhm.
one of the songs, for instance, that has been so pivotal for me, that I'm just like, hey, my kids are going to listen to this in class when they're doing their little warm-up activities. Or, hey, if this kid missed an assignment and he was a little late turning that in, maybe in order to do that assignment and make it up, I'm going to make him write these lines over and over and over of affirmations. But the song for me was this Nas song, "Whose World Is This? The World Is Mine. The World Is Yours. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine." Just getting my kids like knowing that they can do the things that they want to do. The world is theirs. They can have anything that they want to be. Or other Nas song, "I know I can be what I want to be. If I work hard at it, I'll be where I want to be." Um, Learning to like drill that in and to see that there are some positive messages in things like hip hop that can then also still shape their identity. But then also saying like those are some older songs, but like let's evaluate the songs you listen to. Maybe there's some good positive messages in there still, despite the craziness in it.
Yeah, yeah. I like that idea of like co-creating a classroom with your students that's like opening up realms of possibility. Um, And I think you're totally right. This like idea of a melting pot, like your classroom culture is going to change year to year because it's responsive to your students and the way that you interact with them, and the relationships you build with them. Yeah.
Just to piggyback off of what Dallas was saying, last year I felt like I defended hip hop. It was the theme of our Black History Month, and I'd actually gotten like a slight pushback, but like not hip hop, it's ghetto. And I was like, that's so strange. Hip hop is political to me. Hip hop is self-expression. Hip hop has turned and made waves, but in its roots, it is um, everything that we're striving, not everything, but like really pivotal and influential to me in the Black culture for like how we are represented today and like why and how some things came about. But that's another tangent for another day, because I could also go on that. And I have some songs for you that have positive messages that are within their TikTok era. It's taking some research though.
Share them.
Okay, okay.
Share them.
But when it comes to identity, this might sound crazy, but my classroom kind of allowed me to restart. Growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, I felt like my friends were very divided. Like sometimes I wasn't Black enough
Mhm.
because I went to ballet class and because of what side of town my family lived on and how I spoke and taught. But when I got to teach students, especially at this young an age, they don't have that like extra stereotype already built in. They just have a lot of questions
Mhm.
about I grow up, what it looked like. And then it also allows my position allows me to learn a lot about them. I get charged with the mission of leading a lot of our cultural programs. And since some of these cultures are not my culture, it's a natural like two-way street. So when we start talking about Hispanic or Latinx cultures, I have to lean into them because I just don't know. I don't know enough.
Mhm.
Um, and they are better than YouTube University any day. I played a song today and I was like, is this a good song? And he's like, yeah, I've heard this at the party. And I was like, is it clean too? And they're like, yes, it's clean also. Because I don't speak Spanish fluently, so I don't know if something is saying something that's completely off walls. And then the other day I played a song and the students were telling me, oh, this is what's being said in it. I heard a lot of love messages. I was like, wait, tell me more. And they're like, this word means kiss or this word means that. And it's just like a very organic, natural share space for both of us to be ourselves without like unapologetically. Like this is another version of a Black woman unapologetically. And it looks like this. So my classroom has been a nice like restart. And so that's pretty much how the identity kind of like flows in my way. I'm learning from them, they're learning from me. Because my dance background is not what they're usually thinking it is. And so I try to wrap all that in to meet them in the middle and kind of share some of myself.
Yeah. The two-way street thing is important. Yeah, and I feel you about like, I think both of you discussed like learning a different community, like not being from DC and figuring out like how your identity plays out here, and digging into that. And I think that's just so valuable and important. And of course, like I was there too when I was teaching in South Carolina, which is not where I'm from. And so I definitely, yeah, I definitely get that too. Um, how does identity, this is a slightly different question, and I think Jordan, you started to get at this a little bit earlier, but how does identity play out in the adult culture, in your schools? And if you don't feel comfortable answering that, we can talk more generally about like what you know from your peers, friends, colleagues at other.
I'll jump in. Not with anything bad, just something I noticed when I got here. If you're from here, you're like so DC.
Mm,
There was everything from my mannerisms to how I speak, to how like I just approach a situation. They're like, that ain't DC, like that's just not how we are. And so working with a lot of now I have a very blended culture at my school. I would say it's like part New York, a good chunk of DC, and then there's just a little bit of South in there, the beginning of the South, however people want to say it, and a little bit of the Midwest. And so to watch the general like United States kind of explode in a school just based off of how you were raised and what you're used to, is very interesting. And then how you adapt. Because there's times now when my friends see me and they'll be like, this is not how you used to act. Like, this is definitely from you transplanting into the area. They're like, those students are rubbing off on you. So now how I act as an adult in society has definitely been transformed by my adult culture here. A little bit of rub off of DC has come onto, I like to call Kentucky the star of the South of this Southern girl. And so I've borrowed and taken a little bit of it. But yeah, I always just think it's really funny whenever I get, like, we even get a new person and they're like, so DC. And it's like, there's like just certain things. So
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think kind of essentially the same thing. When I first got here, I recognized that people were so DC. But I think that was the thing that I kind of like craved. I felt like in a way part of what brought me here as well was hearing so much about this culture and everything, this richness from this area that I was like, oh, I need to experience this thing. Allegedly, this is the land of milk and honey. Let me go get a sip of this milk and this honey. Let me drink the Kool-Aid right fast of what this place is. And so I think I've really enjoyed seeing and experiencing. I love culture. Like I love learning more about culture. And I think as I also learn more about my own culture and my own background, my own identity. It's definitely cool to like see other people. So um, it was cool because I mentioned earlier, off mic of sorts, that I had some students from Georgetown Medical Center come talk to our kids, and they led an icebreaker. Um, with the students, basically asking the kids their names and their passions and their interests and their career pursuits that they wanted to look forward to one day. But their final question was, can't miss like can't miss in DC. Like you must go do these things in DC. And I think hearing some of my kids like thoughts on like, hey, if you come to DC, you definitely got to go do this thing. Or hey, if you go here, you definitely got to try this type of food. I thought that was like the coolest thing, especially like as an outsider, but also it allows for like some buy-in. But it also allows for students to like, and I know we're talking about the adults right now, but it also allows for like the students and even the adults to find that passion and that joy about that place. So if anybody were to ask me about New York, I'm telling you everything through and through about New York. I'm gonna let that New York shine. You're gonna know I'm from New York before the end of a conversation. If my voice don't say it and my accent don't show it, because allegedly I lost that thing a long time ago, you're gonna know I'm a New Yorker. There's no doubt in my mind you're gonna think I'm from anywhere else. And so I enjoy that like being here as well, seeing and experience so many different like things, but then understanding that it's just not like cultural identity. That's the thing. Just people's personal passions and their strengths is another thing that I enjoy. I'm big on like synergy and seeing like how as a team and how as a group of people we can like work as a collective to utilize our strengths and our gifts to just make the magic happen. And I think sometimes that's an overlooked aspect within organizations, people's gifts and what they really can bring to the table.
Mhm. I think it's so important to name as well, like that one thing that an adult team can do really well in a school is allow like individual educators to have that room and the capacity to really like dig into like local history, local culture. Yeah, to build that culture within their school, within their classroom as well. And feeling like you have the room to do that. Did you
Yeah,
want to?
so a true well at school, if you're like taking in all of that from like everywhere. So for instance, I mentioned it from time to time about how I had a STEM fair. Um, that STEM fair is literally from my identity as a scientist. Like I just really love science. And not everybody's gonna be into the sciences and not everybody wants to do those things. But my passion and my identity in this might allow a student to say, hey, one day I might want to do this thing, or hey, I want to participate in this STEM fair. I want to go do this thing. Can you like show me how I can like take this thing to the next level? And so I think that's why it's important to like really understand like an identity, because then it also then shapes the identity of the entire school in itself. Like, hey, we can offer these things because we have these staff members that do these things.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that. I think one thing that I really loved about my classroom experience was so my background is in history. I love history. I love Black history specifically. And I think my coach when I was teaching was really great about letting me build out a curriculum and like add in lesson plans and activities that allowed the kids to explore Black history in our city, like, and really like be local with it. And it was a learning opportunity for me. It was a learning opportunity for them. But yeah, just being able to like have an adult culture where you can bring your passions to the forefront to your students, and really being able to like exist in sort of an intersectional way. So like I am a Black scientist, and I feel like that's important for the kids to see that representation, or Black dancer, and see that representation. So I think, yeah, that's so valuable. Um, are there any, from on the flip side, are there any challenges that you face as a Black educator specifically? Can be a tough question.
I was gonna say it's some of it sometimes is the stereotype
Mm,
around the students that I teach. When I say that I'm teaching in DC, you'd be so, I'm not even sure if it is uncommon at this point if other DC teachers get it, but I get a, whoo, you must, you have your work cut out for you. And I'm like, that in itself, without me saying whether I have my work cut out for me or not, is somehow like hanging over the head, I think, of not just DC, but like urban areas that are majority Black,
mhm,
like right off the rip. I think people are just like, wow, it's tough out there. And I'm like, it maybe you didn't allow me to even share my experience yet. You're assuming that it's tough. And I do think some of that is because of race.
mhm,
Um, that there's just this assumption around the Black educator's job is tougher if you're a Black educator teaching at a Black school. But outside of here, I've also had a flip experience teaching at like a private studio where sometimes just me being myself is hard in that room. My tone is taken differently. So I feel like I need to like watch what I'm saying or doing, even if it's the same as another colleague. Um, and I know that's definitely a perception thing of how I'm saying something versus the other person. I'm just like, wait, we just said the same thing. But at the end of the day, I'm a Black woman saying it.
mhm.
So it landed differently, whether it was intended differently or if it was the same, somehow it magically landed differently. And not to code switch is like really hard because you want to just come off as yourself. But I feel like the Black educator is still being sometimes pushed to code switch, especially if you're not teaching Black students. And then you're allowed to not code switch when you are teaching Black students, but it feels like you have to just be so much more sometimes because
Mhm.
there's already something hanging over you that's saying your job is going to be rough because you're teaching another, like you're teaching a Black child. If that sort of makes sense, if y'all are with me. Sort of.
Yeah, I think that, I think you named like a couple of things that are really, I think sometimes there's different standards of like professionalism for Black folks in a school where we're like expected to like contain more of ourselves sometimes in order to appear a certain way, or there's like a pressure for respectability. And then I think, yeah, like it can be really heavy and grating, right? To hear people make assumptions about students that like look like you or based on an identity that you share. Like that can be tough to hear. And so I want to name that as well. Like that is a heavy thing.
Yeah, so I could definitely like agree big time with all of those things. And I feel like for me this is a really heavy question because there's so many different like components and feels to this question. Um I find that sometimes it is challenging when you are a Black teacher working with other people who are Black, but then you have a couple of people who you might introduce to students who are not Black, or some of your staff members who you love so dearly might not identify with those students because the students now interact with other people a lot differently than they do you sometimes, or they're so used to somebody that's Black that acts a certain way like this. Or for me, sometimes that idea of they're used to Blackness looking like this one thing instead of realizing that you can be this and this, or you can be that or that. Um, Sometimes it's important to like really expose your students to like just how well-rounded as like Black people we can fully be. But also teaching them to say like, hey, when you're interacting with people, you're going to interact with people the same way, regardless of like who they are, no matter if they're Black or white or anything of that nature. I think sometimes the media and like what they see around them often sometimes, unfortunately, like impacts like their view and like how they behave and stuff. And I just want them to be a little bit better. The other piece that I feel that's been like sometimes a little challenging being a person that identifies with those same people that you teach is that um you feel like you are so much more invested and there's so much in stake for those students. And you want it so much more for them. Um, the life things that they go through, you sometimes like go through with them. Unfortunately, in the city, there's a lot of like gun violence and crime and things of that nature. And I teach a lot of these babies that go through those things that are possibly incarcerated or was just yesterday in jail, or their brother is was once in the school and now is locked up or something like that. Um, and sometimes it's hard like taking those things in and trying to like balance your own personal life and your own personal experience, but really wanting it for these kids because you see the potential that they might not see in themselves yet. So it gets hard sometimes, especially when you're coming from a place of, yo, I used to do that. I used to be that youngin' that was like wilding. Well, not doing too much craziness, but I used to be that person, and you don't have to do that. Sometimes, again, I take it to music all the time. I always find a rap lyric for everything. I find connections. There's this Jay-Z line where he said, Hove did that, so hopefully you don't have to go through that. And in a way, I tell my students, like, hey, don't do that. Like, I know you might think this is cool, but other people have been through this before. You don't got to do that, or like you don't have to go through that alone. Like, here's a staff member that can do this with you, or you should probably completely avoid this because this is definitely going to be the outcome. And so, as an educator, it is a challenge sometimes to know and see and want so much for your students, but you can't be everybody's superhero. Sometimes you got to like save yourself. And that's been the message that I've been learning more and more throughout the past, like, year. Like you can take them to the water, but you can't force them to drink and you can't drink the water for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of, I mean, like that is a challenge and also a strength, right? It's a double-edged sword where you're like, I just feel so much for these babies and and at the same time, like that can be a source of like empathy burnout. And so like walking that line is really it can be really challenging and it can be really difficult. And I think sometimes intentionally, unintentionally, schools like do place that added responsibility and that added burden to be there for students in so many different ways. And that often falls on the shoulders of Black educators. That's often like uncompensated work. And in some ways it's work that like, it's hard for us to lay down. It's like, I'm not going to ignore this. Like, these are my kids. This is my community. Um, it's not really possible for me to lay that down, but also just like some acknowledgement that this is happening, uh, is important. And I think just like being able to have a space where you can surface that with other educators, with other teachers and say like, hey, are you dealing with this too? How are you filling your cup in those like really difficult times, is important. So I really appreciate you raising that. Ms. Jordan?
Yeah, something that you both have said just kind of like sprung a thought. Something that Dallas was like, I've been there and I've seen that. And then I was thinking about how you've been influenced in education by the Black educators in your life. I was like, some of this comes from either you've walked it or you know that there's better. And that's what I was thinking because I was like, I haven't walked all of my students' paths, but I'm like, sometimes I want to show them you don't even have to walk that path. Like, don't think that's the only way to get there. You don't always have to go through it to get to there. So like just wanting that. But then sometimes there's something else she said, just like wanting better, just that empathy. I think I had a former student, didn't even teach them. I was walking down the street the other day and I heard someone on the side of the street call them a name. Now they're not my student anymore, but everything in me was like, don't treat my kid like that. Don't treat my kid like that. And I was thinking, I was like, part of it's just because I want better for them. I don't want them to have to go through the things I read about or see on. And they weren't even there. They didn't even hear the comment. It was it was all right here, but my natural reaction was no, because I don't want them to have to do that fight. Whether I've experienced whether I've seen the fight or I've done the fighting myself in that particular area. And so both of your thoughts have really just like sprung that thought, because the empathy piece and the Black educator, I do think it's a really heavy for various reasons. And whether it's subconscious or you're fully aware of it, I think sometimes it's subconscious. Um, and we're not fully aware of how much we empathize or sympathize or just the extra little extra things we're doing. And it's from that, oh, I don't know why. I just had to do it. I can't tell you how many of my colleagues are like, I went and got someone a haircut because I just had to do it. I just I couldn't let them come into the school the next day. I had to get the baby wipe and wipe their mouth because I couldn't let them keep going like that.
Yeah, and so sometimes I question like, are like, not to say our white counterparts, I hate to say those types of phrases, but like, hey, like, are they also doing those things, or like, is that just what I'm doing or we're doing over here? Um, I really am curious some days, because you always see us as a people be so giving and so nurturing and so caring. Um, but I'm just like, these are things that everybody needs. Like, why is, not to say why, because I don't know. It's a thought. Like, why is everybody not getting this? Why aren't all the kids getting these basic things? Or, and again, sometimes you have to think about, hey, some schools are not necessarily equipped for this. And so now people, Black educators, are now stepping up to fill a need that the schools might not have. Um, so just a random thought, sorry for jumping in. You just made me really think, because I remember I told a kid the other day, I don't know this kid's name, but we were outside for a fire drill, and I was like, I see you pulling and playing your hair. I'm like, do you need a hair pick or something like that? Like, yo, come find me tomorrow. I got you on a hair pick. I'm gonna bring this hair pick for you. Just to like make sure that he's good, or like, hey, let's go wash our face in my classroom sink, like just to make sure you know how to like properly like groom and take care of yourself. I know I'm not the only one here that would do some of those things, and I know there's so many other educators in the city that's doing this. But I think we need more teachers like that that would actually care about their students.
I was gonna say, I think it's a fine line. Oh, sorry, I jumped in too. But I thought it was a fine line between, I've been in spaces sometimes when we've called our white counterparts white saviors, or do they have the savior complex? And me being a Black educator, they don't label that like that because it's me helping out another student that looks like me. And I can't always say that my white counterparts are having a savior complex. Sometimes they're just doing the thing that someone with human nature would do. Not saying the savior complex definitely exists, but sometimes it's just it's humankind. It's not necessarily that. And so I actually, to add on to that, I don't know. I don't know when I'm watching someone be human and when I'm watching someone dip into that like savior complex. And we definitely don't put that same label onto Black educators. For some reason, when we're doing it, it's just naturally humanized.
Yeah, I think part of that is like expecting, I think this goes back to the concept of like added like uncompensated things that like Black educators do or are asked to do. Which is just like I think when we think about like a savior complex, it's someone that expects to be thanked for that work. And I think this is, for many Black teachers, like it's communal, like it's just like, oh, I'm just gonna do this just because I don't expect anyone to say anything or comment on it. Just because like all our kids are all our kids, you know? And I think that that's definitely, if you have a colleague who isn't Black that is doing those same actions, as long as they're not like expecting like extreme gratitude or like, you don't need to get your flowers for that, like, you know? But I think it can be a difficult line to walk. And I think what it comes down to is just like, when you know better, you do better. Yeah, Dallas.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned the word expect, and I think on one end we try not to expect a thanks or anything like that, but then sometimes it's hard because at a certain point when you're developing these young individuals, um, they start to expect you to do those things, and everything has to now be kind of handed and given to them, and so still trying to like maintain this thin line of, hey, we're supporting you, we're helping you out because you need these things. And how do I now train you to be self-sufficient so that you can now learn how to like earn to like get those things yourself one day? It's hard sometimes because, you know, I find that Black people oftentimes, at least where I was from, it's like, hey, my mom kind of taught me like if you don't have it, do it out until you're able to like get it. But then seeing like, hey, in other areas, they're probably freely giving to like their kids, or like I just find that sometimes learning how to like ask for like support and ask for the things you need is sometimes frowned on, like in Black communities when, hey, if like a white student or somebody needed something, or one day this student is in college, they know how to apply for scholarships, they know how to ask for money, they know how to ask for these things. And our students aren't prepared for knowing how to ask properly, knowing how to accept um, a no, because if we're just all the time giving and giving and giving, how do we now support them when the giving is not there to get?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thinking when you spoke on that, I was thinking of two words, balance and boundaries. And those are things that I think we're developing as a like ongoing as like a race and as a culture. Because I think a lot of times boundaries gets talked about through therapy. And how often are we not, talking about therapy in the Black community and the balance between, I hear it all the time, and I do it myself. They need to have a little bit more grit. They need to have some gumption. Like they need to be able to work hard and pull themselves up and know if they don't got it, they need to go get it. But then at the same time, we're looking and we're like, we're still the same community that does a lot of yelling sometimes versus that hug and trying to like retransform like ways that have been passed on generationally and systemically. And so I think the Black educator within just the Black community, what I mean? Like we're taking on a lot of those things that like falls outside of just like the Black educator room and just realm and just falls into like the Black realm. But because we work in a very special field where we get to like grow and help develop young minds and character, it gets real tousled real quick between finding that balance and finding like a boundary when we're just learning about boundaries as ourselves as a people, you know?
Yeah, I think one thing that your comments are making me think of, um, is just so this concept that like education is going to free you is, I think, especially for Black communities in America, that has been so ingrained in a lot of us. Like your education is what's going to give you all the opportunities. And at the same time, that also places like burden on educators to fix so much that's like not, that's outside the bounds of the classroom, right? And so like we often are in situations where there's like generational trauma that is caused by systemic conditions that like move beyond the classroom. And then when kids come to school, when they graduate, they're supposed to have all these possibilities in front of them. And it can, again, be really heavy just knowing that like you are doing as much as you can for the kids in front of you, and trying to teach them to advocate. You want them to rely on you. You want them to also self-advocate. And yet like there's so much beyond the scope of your own capacity that can be really difficult to deal with. Yeah. I hope we can move, I guess leave on a more positive note. But I think,
Yeah, I blame me. I'm sorry, my bad. I took us down a little.
no, I think it's important to name because there are like real, like very, frankly, very specific, unique challenges that are faced by Black teachers, Black educators. And I think it's like, it's really important to name that and to be aware of the conditions and history and systems that have caused all of that. And that have these major ripple effects and they're so ingrained, and it can be a lot oftentimes in like classrooms. Like I know I did a lot of unlearning when I was in the classroom, when I moved out of the classroom. And I think that as well is like an important journey to talk about and to name. And I think the value of like a space that is dedicated to Black educators to talk about that and to discuss that. And I think we've had a really rich discussion. I hope we can continue. I hope we can continue that in the event spaces that we have coming up in the Rest and Rise group. But yeah, I think as well, they can be really like positive spaces too, where we're unpacking our challenges, but also where you can just like lay down everything and just like be yourself. So my final question, my closing question is how do you see the benefit of having like a dedicated space for Black educators to show up authentically?
I'll go. It's it's refreshing. So I know when I'm in a space with other Black educators, sometimes it's just feeling okay to say, oh, I learned this today with someone who looks like me. So like the things you were talking about, it feels better to release and let go of some things, just knowing like, oh, you're experiencing this for the first time, or oh, you've actually dealt with this your whole entire life. So having that dedicated space to authentically be myself with someone who potentially has maybe walked the same line is so, because I don't feel like I have to re-explain something.
Mm-hmm.
Or explain, even not re-explain, just explain.
Yeah.
And that, and just that alone is like a great space to be in. And you need that, because the constant explaining or re-explaining, wow, while it's fine, but you don't want to have to do it every day, every moment. And I feel like as Black educators, we're doing it a lot, and as Black people, we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot of explaining and unlearning and teaching someone else, and that's great. But to walk into a room and not have to like teach somebody like, oh, I heard this word you use, like I'll just say like slang, any type of slang or terminology, to not have to explain that to maybe, oh, you're also hearing that as well. Whew. Because it's different. It's different in like different areas and different pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So me painted a picture of what a well-stocked teacher's lounge would be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, hey, in the perfect world of teachers' lounges, I wouldn't have kids randomly trying to use a teacher's lounge vending machine. I wouldn't have to worry about like, hey, can you take a nap in here or not? Or like a bell is about to ring or something like that. In teachers' lounge heaven, um, we would just have everything that we need in this one space as an educator, as a Black educator, to like care for and be good and have what you need. Um, my brain literally said a place where it's take what you need. If you need this, this is already here for you. If you need this is here for you. Um, it's just like imagine this land of milk and honey, teachers lounge that yo, what I need is already given to me. And hey, if you're a teacher too that don't really like to be in a teacher's lounge, um, there's a space for you right here. Come through.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I picture when I heard the scenario you just presented to us.
Yeah. I love that analogy as well. And I think that's really helpful for educators who aren't Black to really like understand the need for like this space, which is like two of my three best friends are also educators. And so when I'm talking with them, I'm like, oh, I don't have to translate anything. I can talk about like this obscure phrase. And, and then my third best friend is like, what does that mean? And I think for a lot of teachers that are trying to like explain their needs, like to a non-teacher, like that can feel like a difficult process. That can feel like a lot to handle. And I think it is an analogous like circumstance for a Black person and for a Black educator specifically. It's nice to just not have to explain what you need, and to just like be in an environment where, like you said, Dallas, you can go in, you can take what you need. There's no expectations. And I think something really important for me about like building out this group and this experience is that we're not placing any extra expectations on the educators. Like, this is not like a space where you're expected to come and bring like an advocacy solution. Like, you can just show up, you can drop in, drop out, take what you need, hopefully make some good connections. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about this project. And this was like the greatest conversation. So I'm so glad that I was able to chat with both of you.
Yeah, most definitely.
All right.
It's easy when you like enjoy like talking about something you believe in. And I think, yeah, like I would love to just talk more about these things and like how we can just support each other better. And um, yeah, we all need each other. And I think that's one of the things that I found is community and other people, recognizing that sometimes you don't have to do it alone as an educator. As a person, you just don't have to do it alone. And I find that from what I hear you're saying, this is the place that you can get literally what you need and who you need to like support you. Even if sometimes doing nothing is what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to be ideally, like, I mean, like I said, take what you need. We're going to have hopefully some happy hours, some yoga workshops, just like some wellness spaces. So it should be a good time. Very excited to see you both there.
I was gonna say thank you. I enjoy this. I enjoyed the rabbit hole we went down. It's so nice to be able to talk those things and not feel like you're defending those things, if that makes sense. Like you're having a conversation versus a debate.
Mhm.
Sometimes when you have these, and like I'm excited for a space like that where it's not a debate, it's a conversation because we're on the same playing field. I understand exactly what you're going through. And sometimes there's just not a lot of those spaces, especially as we're trying to empower to have more of those spaces. A lot of them aren't necessarily like, come to the table as you are, let's talk about this, take what you need. They're like set up differently, they're dressed differently, like the table is set a little differently. So it's nice to be able to sit at a table like that, or like this, like the one that's coming up.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording if that's okay.